On the edge of the Atlantic lies a world of rock and water. Wind-scoured and rugged, yet full of grace and beauty. Exposed to a restless ocean and Europe's wildest weather, the animals and people of these islands face challenge after challenge. We've lived side by side for centuries here, sharing the same landscape through the same seasons. And as the world changes, pressures are mounting on all of us. So can the people of these islands work together with the natural world to find a new way forward? Here, on Scotland's wild west coast. Here, in the Hebrides. The west coast of Scotland has hundreds of islands. But there are only a few places like this where you can almost step across from the mainland. It's one of the oldest gateways to the Hebrides, the crossing by ferry from Glenelg to the Isle of Skye, the Kyle Ray Narrows. It's a short crossing, but there's a strong tidal flow. Seasoned ferryman Donnie MacDonald knows precisely how to use these currents to get across. And he's not the only one to exploit this fast channel.
See all day. It's good entertainment for us as well. And the tourists just love them, completely love them.
Donnie steers to give them a ringside view, and the Eagle puts on a show. He's realised he needn't hunt for his own mackerel. As soon as a seal catches a fish, the gulls dive. And the Eagle spots his chance.
Look at this. He's put on a good show today.
The gull has the mackerel in its throat, but the Eagle's determined to win its prize.
Did you get that?
The largest predatory bird in Britain, living right alongside us. and benefiting us in unexpected ways. The income from the tourists is keeping this community ferry service alive. This is the story of the people who live side by side with wild animals in the Hebrides. From the air, many of these islands seem the very essence of wilderness. People have farmed these islands for over 6,000 years, shaping the land. Some of the oldest workings are still visible as strips and ridges on the hills. But from the 1700s, a new type of farming took over, which still exists today: crofting. The Hebrides supported thousands of crofts, small pieces of land close to the shore. Families lived in cottages, growing their own food and tending their livestock on communal land. There are fewer crofters now, but some people do remember how things once were. Alice Starmore is a well-known knitting designer. She owns a croft on Lewis.
It used to be a necessity to croft. When my parents were children, you had to have a croft to survive. And it was tough. Now it's a privilege to have land and to be able to use it. I consider that to be a huge privilege, and it's a really important part of my life.
Traditionally, crofters spent their winters by the shore. Then in the summer, families took their livestock up to the moor, allowing the grass at the croft to regrow. When Alice was a child, the hills of the moorland became her home every summer.
It was very beautiful, and we didn't have electricity, and you just lived very, very simply. And we walked, and just as children had the whole freedom of the place. It was just discovery every day in nature.
The moor is a haven for wildlife. Red-throated and black-throated divers return every year to breed. And the small, isolated pools are perfect for damselflies. Its spectacular outbursts of natural colour have been a lifelong inspiration.
I take my cue from nature. I'm well known in the world of knitting, especially for my colour work. And it all comes from here, and from my experiences, and from my love of the nature of this place. And every colour that I've composed out of it comes specifically from nature. I think people in textiles and art have always used nature. Nature is just filled with colour and texture and all of those things. So yes, this place specifically has informed that for me.
Crofting is in decline, and nowadays is more a lifestyle choice, and not an easy one at that. But perhaps people like Alice can keep the traditions going for the next generation.
My grandson is very, very interested in the croft and in the cattle, and he enjoys them immensely. I would like to think that for me, anyway, that's something that is going to continue. I would like to leave this croft in really, really good shape for the future.
By spending their summers away on the moor, the crofters gave the coastal land time to regenerate. And by giving nature time to recover, they created a unique place down by the shoreline. The Macair. In summer, it's a wonderland of flowers and insects. Once, much of Britain's farmland looked like this. But now the Macair is almost the only place to find one of the rarest bees in Britain. Which feeds on deep-flowered plants like vetches and clovers.
In the Hebrides is made up of a really rich mosaic of pasture land, agricultural land, but all in small units, little parcels, so you get lots of different habitats in a relatively small area, and that's what makes it so attractive to the wildlife.
For centuries, crofters have fertilised the Macair with seaweed and let the land lie fallow for years between crops. It's a recipe which allows wildlife to thrive. The closeness of beach and cultivated land has thrown a lifeline to one of our rarest birds. The chough. They're a type of crow. Here in Oronsay, they live close to the shore.
Choughs are amazing birds, really. They're full of character. Like many members of the crow family, they're actually very intelligent, but there's a sort of smartness and more sort of chumminess about choughs, really. I like to think of them as the sort of collar and tie version of the crow family. Choughs spend most of their time looking for insects to feed on. That's primarily what they're actually after.
They dig for them in the rotting kelp or in cowpats above the beach. It's time-consuming, little reward for a lot of hard work, and tempers can flare. Apparently, some birds simply can't find enough to eat, especially in their first winter. There are fewer than 60 pairs of chough in the Hebrides. But there is a simple way to help them. It's what the RSPB do on Islay and Oronsay.
To have cattle managed in traditional ways where they're out grazing on pastures year-round, so they're fed outside in the winter and whatnot. So there is this sort of year-round supply of cattle dung, and that provides a year-round source of food for the birds.
Finding enough food is one thing, but finding shelter is another, especially if you nest on the ground.
Ah, the call of the corncrake, so often heard in the northwest, but so seldom seen.
Corncrakes fly here from Africa. A century ago, you could hear them craking all over Britain. But now they're only found here. They don't ask much, just for somewhere to hide until their chicks are grown. But on modern farms, there's no space for nettles, and the crops are cut earlier now, killing their chicks. In the islands, though, crofters leave their nettles. If they also harvest late, they can give the corncrakes a place to call home.
There's just over 1,000 calling males. They're the only ones that make this peculiar rasping call, but that's up from just over 300 calling males back in the early 90s.
Colonsay is warmed by offshore currents. It's so lush here that palm trees grow in the gardens of Colonsay House. And this island is home to more than 1/3 of all Britain's flowering plants. An abundance of riches for the insects which pollinate them, including one which is really special. Britain's native honeybee. Andrew Abrahams is a master beekeeper.
The black bee is well adapted to island life and probably West Coast life, you could say, in the sense that there always seems to be feast or famine. I suppose the skill of living out on the islands is to adapt to that, and the bees pretty well do that.
Black bees have lived on the mainland since the end of the last ice age. But they were brought to these islands by Irish monks more than 1,000 years ago. One of their priories still stands on neighbouring Oronsay.
For them, bees were very important for honey, mostly medicinal purposes, but also for beeswax.
The monks used the beeswax to make candles, helping them read and write, so preserving knowledge through the Dark Ages. But in the early 1900s, black bees on the mainland were virtually wiped out by disease. Continental bees were imported to replace them, but they're not as well adapted to our climate.
The black bee is suited to the hard weather, wet, cold winters, and often very wet, cold summers. It has the ability to survive in difficult conditions. So it's important that the genes of the black bee, which is our native bee, are conserved. And that's what I'm hoping to do here with the bees that I've got.
Andrew is lobbying the Scottish Government to turn Colonsay into a black bee reserve, so no other kinds of bees and their diseases can be brought here.
We need to conserve the black bees. We maybe don't know why, we have no idea what the future holds, but scientists the world over are shouting the warning that we lose honeybees in general, but also genetic resources of honeybees at our peril. We mustn't lose that genetic resource.
If Andrew does manage to turn these islands into a reserve, it will give the black bees a sanctuary, just as Oronsay once was for the In the waters around his home on Coll, Innes Henderson fishes for crabs with his son Ross. And in the summer, they're not alone.
We get quite a lot of visitors in the summer. The main one's the basking sharks, which seem to be getting more and more every year, and the most fantastic creatures that we know very little about.
For years, basking sharks were harpooned for their oil, and their numbers crashed. They're protected now, and the waters around Coll and Thie are once more among the best places in the world to see them.
They feed on the surface with their noses up, and I mean, there's quite often days where we're having to drive around them. There's that many of them.
Basking sharks are the second largest fish in the world. But even so, they've been slow to give up their secrets. Dr. Movis Gore has studied sharks across the globe, but basking sharks in Scotland had eluded her, until a chance meeting in Tobermory Harbour changed everything.
We were waiting to fuel up, and there was this fishing boat in the way. So I went over to talk to the fisherman, just asking him, you know, I ask everybody if they've ever seen any basking sharks. And he turns around to me in a throwaway remark, and he says, "We've got hundreds of them on Coll." I said, "What?" You know?
She said, "That's impossible." And she came out the next day, and she saw 100 and, I think it was 130 that first day.
It was a breakthrough for Movis. After years of looking, she could finally get to grips with these mysterious giants. In the summer months, they're drawn to our rich Hebridean waters to feed on plankton.
You just see this black fin coming through the waters, and often as not, they'll turn towards you and they'll be coming straight at you, and it's just wonderful. They're so calm and they're beautiful. They move so smoothly through the water, and they're so graceful at what they're doing. They're just feeding most of the time. And they seem to not mind you as long as you don't mind them. They're just wonderful animals.
Since Movis first saw the sharks here with Innes, she's come back every summer, just like them. She's even fitted some sharks with tags to track where they go. And one of her tags revealed something extraordinary. Just how far a basking shark can travel.
And this one had gone all the way across the Atlantic and ended up just off of Newfoundland. And this was a real first for basking sharks. Nobody had ever shown that they could actually do this. This tag was absolutely fantastic, telling us that the sharks can cross the Atlantic. They had the energy and the drive and the need to do this.
People used to imagine that when the sharks left our coasts, they didn't feed, but instead wintered far below, in a sleep-like state. But as Movis and other scientists discover more about their lives, it seems they travel and feed continuously. Perhaps basking shark populations all around the globe are connected. Sharks are in decline everywhere. But here in the Hebrides, basking sharks seem to be doing well.
I think people are beginning to appreciate just what wonderful animals they are and what an iconic species it is for Scotland.
The sharks are a sign of how much food there is around these islands in summer. But the seas here used to be even richer. And they could be again, if we can bring our demands into balance with nature. A healthy sea benefits everyone who fishes. And that includes communities of animals. Huge numbers of gannets, a fifth of the world population, fish off these shores. And in turn, we can benefit from them. The seabird colonies of the Hebrides are some of the very best.
The Hebrides are an absolute stunning place for seabirds, not just in the UK context, not just in a European context. We've got some of the top seabird colonies in the world.
The Treshnish Isles lie just to the west of Mull. And they're home to everyone's favourite bird. Puffins. Coming back to nest after spending the winter out at sea. But there are dangers on the cliffs above. Ravens will kill puffins. And hooded crows, or hoodies, will mug them for their fish once they're ashore. But these puffins have some unlikely allies. Every afternoon a boat arrives. And the puffins know that the ravens and crows are frightened of people. So they wait on the sea until the visitors set foot on the islands. And as soon as the coast is clear, in they come. Providing the people show respect, it's an ideal trade-off. In exchange for getting on with our lives in safety, the puffins give us the views of a lifetime. And everyone loves puffins.
Puffins are such characters. You know, each one is just oozing with sort of character and sort of attitude.
Puffins mate for life, but they've been apart all winter, so now they reaffirm their vows.
They've got that really brightly coloured bill, and it's there for a purpose. And there's a whole series of little head flicking and beak tapping and bobbing that's involved in actually showing off that fantastic bill and demonstrating that you are the one for your partner.
Once they have a chick, both parents will need to gather beakfuls of sprats and sand eels.
These birds will actually let you get really close to them so you can get a real inside view of what life is like for a puffin. And it's not easy these days either. You know, the puffin is one of these species that is relying on sand eels, and sand eels are actually in a lot of trouble at the moment.
The problem is the world's climate is changing, and as the sea warms up, there's less food for sand eels and fewer fish for the puffins. The warming seas have issued another challenge to these islands on the edge. The Hebrides are renowned for storms. And now the effects of climate change are making them even more powerful and unpredictable. It's far from easy living here, and many islands struggle to hold on to their people. The island of Jura. Willie MacDonald is head keeper at one of the estates, and he's lived here all his life.
Any small island, small population, everything about them is fragile. The economy is very fragile. The population, everything dictated by the population, because you haven't got enough people to sustain businesses properly. Everything's on the borderline all the time. And I think that's the way it'll always be. Your ferry service is your critical link. That has to be subsidised. So, I mean, everything is fragile. It's just part of life here.
It doesn't help that Jura is so isolated. The only way to drive on or off the island is from neighbouring Isla. On Isla and Jura, there's one animal which brings in more money than any other. On Jura, it even outnumbers the people by 30 to 1, and it's the mainstay of the island's economy. The red deer. Jura's name is appropriate, from the Old Norse for Island of Deer. How they're managed is critical for both us and them.
Obviously the red deer are our dominant wild animal, but I mean there's lots of others as well. We've got 7 sporting estates, all of them actively involved in deer management, and it's very important to them. If that wasn't happening, then the deer population in Jura would be, well, it would explode, and that would then bring in a lot of problems with it.
It's Willie MacDonald's job to control the herd by culling, to maintain a careful balance between people, the landscape, and the deer.
We control the animals. That means that we control the management of the deer herds. Farming controls your bird life, the environment that these birds and the wildlife lives within. So man has a huge part to play in that.
But there's a fine line between man's involvement and plain interference. Over on the Uists, there's a non-native animal that has settled in rather comfortably. Back in the 1970s, hedgehogs were introduced by a well-meaning gardener to eat slugs. Since then, their population has exploded. And they're eating the eggs of rare waders on the Macaire too. And without natural predators, there are now between 3,000 and 4,000 of these prickly customers running around the islands. But there's an ongoing project to capture every one, luring them into traps with fish oil and sending them back to the mainland where they belong. White-tailed eagles, reintroduced from Norway. The island of Mull is now home to 14 pairs. And plantations of conifers provide ideal places to nest. The eagles were wiped out by hunters. The last bird shot in 1918. But now the white-tailed eagle is protected by law. Every new chick is monitored by the Forestry Commission and David Sexton from the RSPB.
When the chicks are about 5 or 6 weeks old, we make a close visit to find out how they're doing, give them a health check. It's a tricky operation. We're always a little bit worried and concerned, make sure things go well.
And all under the watchful eyes of the parents. Once they've settled down, the chicks are ringed to help identify them when they're older. Reintroducing these eagles to Scotland has been a success. From the first few birds released in the mid-1970s, there are now over 50 pairs breeding in the Hebrides. And as this year's chicks prepare to leave, each first flight is a testament to the communities of people who've brought them this far. But bringing white-tailed eagles back has been controversial. They are expert hunters, and some farmers fear for their lambs.
They're big predators, and we're all getting used to living with a bird again that has been extinct now in Scotland for virtually 100 years. So it does get some getting used to.
But often they're just scavenging. These two youngsters have found a deer carcass. And of course they're commonly called sea eagles for a reason. This is where they search for much of their food. We're getting to know them again, like the islanders who once knew them so well.
There are quite a number of Gaelic names for the white-tailed eagle, but the one that it's best known for is Iollar Sul na Grian, which means the eagle with the sun in its eye. The adult has this beautiful golden yellow sort of iris to its eye, as if the sun was shining from it.
And gold is what the eagles are bringing. Tourists are flocking here to see them.
They have been a tremendous benefit to the islands. There's a tremendous tourist economy that is just going to see the sea eagles. And it's bringing somewhere in the region of, for Mull, perhaps about £5 million to the economy each year. I have to say that the white-tailed eagle is something really special for me. They're big, long-lived birds with an identity. They are individuals. You can get to know them as individuals. And that's something quite special, I think, in the natural world.
These islands, with their unique landscapes and spectacular wildlife, have been popular with visitors for a very long time. People have come here for years to take to the water, on paddle steamers like the Waverley, to visit castles like Duart, or to cruise alongside dolphins. Travel to see the basalt columns of Staffa. Journey into the hidden world of Fingal's Cave. Tourism is set to play a huge role in the future of the people and the wildlife living here. But the key is our relationship with the animals and the home we share with them. If we can farm and fish sensitively, if we can show respect for other lives, and strike a balance between our needs and theirs, the Hebrides have every chance of remaining so special. These are islands which can inspire us, which can fill us with awe. Here, in the Hebrides.